Welcome back, NPTEL students. It's great to have you back. I hope you enjoyed the content that we had for week one. Thanks to some of you for being active on the mailing list. I hope more of you start being active on the mailing list. I think it's generally a good idea to be up on the topic through the discussions and through the topics that are going on outside the class also. We'll get you more involved in the topics that are outside the class, but please participate in the mailing list. Not just asking questions, right? Answer questions for others, help others to understand a topic if you have understood better, or if you've seen something interesting that's happening outside the class, please post it in the mailing list. So what we'll do for the week 2 is actually to look at right to privacy, some old research work done on the space of privacy, then what is contextual integrity, then we look at privacy policy. We'll spend quite amount of time on understanding what privacy policy is, how some of the companies' privacy policies are. Some companies that you may be interacting very regularly, we look at their privacy policy and see how they do. The first one is what we look at is the right to privacy. This is a work that was done in 1890. As part of this class is our topic of privacy. This is one of the most important document that you should be doing, right? This talked about the right to privacy. And as I have marked here, we'll go look at the document itself. So this is written by Samuel Warren and Brandeis. This is very popular document. You'll generally hear about Warren and Brandeis' name while discussing the topic of privacy. So what did this article basically talked about raised a lot of questions about the idea of right to privacy, giving the scenarios in that era, showing that why privacy is needed. So we'll look at some aspects. Please, again, my role here is to only get you excited about some parts of the document. Feel free to go read the document as if you're interested in knowing more details about the article itself. Right to life, right? So this is one of the I think this right to is also very common now, right? So there's GDPR, which is talking about right to be forgotten in now 2016, 2017 period. The topic of right to be forgotten has come. So this is right to life, and how it was necessary in those days to be discussing about right to property, is land or is cattle. Right? So the article, please keep in mind, was written in 1890. That's why the context of cattle, all that is coming in. And there's one way also to think about privacy as a property right? So it is my data, right? It is my data, and who should have access to it, right? If you have access to it, what will I get in return of that access? And what benefits do I get because you have access to my data? If you just think about it, this is just the concept of property, which is being used to describe privacy. Is this one phenomena, one way of describing the content of privacy also, or topic of privacy also. Right, so if you look at this, it says right to enjoy life, right to be let alone, right to liberty secures the exercise of extensive civil privileges. We have talked about let alone. If you remember the Weston's characters that he had created, or taxonomy that he had created, you would remember the 4 or 5 characters that we talked about, right? Solitude, right? And that also right to be let alone was there, which is I just want to be alone in the topic of privacy, right? When I'm discussing something, when I don't want to be interacting with anybody else. I will get you to some specific, to be let alone, right? So this is an important aspect of a proposal for this particular article. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations demand a legal recognition and the beautiful capacity for growth which characterizes the common law. So I think the idea of common law also is, I mean, both of them are lawyers, so they talk about the privacy from the legal point of view. Right of circulating portraits, again emphasizing the need for the topic of privacy there. Surrounding physical property to certain of the conditions necessary or helpful to worldly prosperity, right? So again, the necessity of having privacy, what are the benefits of it is being argued here. Individual is entitled to decide whether that which is his shall be given to the public, right? So in every such case, the individual is entitled. So the control of information that the users should have is actually mentioned here. The statutory right is of no value unless there is a publication. The common law right is lost as soon as there is a publication. Meaning, I think these are all references to the common law and the legal system in the US at that point in time. I'll let you read this. This is again talking about the requirement of privacy. A man records in a letter to his son or his diary that he did not dine with his wife on a certain day. No one into whose hands those papers fall could publish them to the world. Again, keep the legal background. The document is written in a very legal way. Even if possessions of the document had been obtained rightfully, and the prohibition would not be confined to the publication of a copy of the letter itself or of the diary entry. So again, the argument, meaning the analogy that you want to keep in mind here, even though it is talked about a man's record of a diary entry, all that entry and the diary itself, think about it as web access that you have. You are accessing Netflix, and you're basically leaving out saying the trails of which movies are you watching, which movies are you rating, all of that. Those are, let's take pages, and the entries in the diary and your own profile on Netflix itself is the diary itself, right? So I think that's where the argument is, which as a user, what control do you have over this information? Unpublished collection of news possessions, no element of a literary nature is protected from piracy. Again, piracy is by itself a separate topic where copies of it being used, meaning I'm sure you understand piracy of movies, right? New movie shows up, and very quickly many copies of the movies are online, and the creators worth is actually lost when you start doing piracy, right? So I'll let you go through this document, but the idea is that this was one of the documents which argued the right to privacy as the concept. So here is another idea. So I think this idea, so what is the context of these content, right? The first week we saw about definitions of privacy, right? So there are meaning broadly, if you see, there are very high level, Alan Weston's definition, right? Warren and Brandis looked at what privacy is. Then there is this contextual integrity which came, which is what we are going to be talking about right now. Contextual integrity is an idea by which you can think of how privacy can be provided, how privacy can be protected. So until now, the way we thought about privacy, right? We talked about control of information. Even just now, I mentioned about Netflix. You browsing, and probably you're going to a mall. Somebody's taking a picture. All that. In general, if you see, we never talked about what context is that picture being taken, what context is that information being used. That's what this article is arguing about, Helen's work. So here is the contextual integrity ties adequate protection for privacy to norms of specific context demanding that information gathering and dissemination be appropriate to that context and obey the governing norms of distribution within it. So even if you go back and think about the definitions of privacy that we talked about, control of information, but control of information in what context? What context information is collected? What context information is being used? That's the primary argument of this idea called contextual integrity. So yes, this actually talks about multiple context as an example. So public records online. This talks about all the public records like public school information, property ownership, all of this. Okay. And then talks about what is the need for collecting this information, how this information is to be kept, all that. Second context is consumer profiling and data mining, right? Which I think all of us agree, all of us understand pretty well. Profiling, meaning Netflix knowing what your preferences are, Amazon knowing what your preferences are. Fewer are aware that this information is shipped off and aggregated in data warehouses where it is organized, stored, and analyzed. Right? I think at this point, this article was written, I think, in 2004. But now I think the understanding of this data being collected, analyzed, and stored is probably much more well known now. The third context is radio frequency identification, shortly called as Rfid tags, primarily driven for doing production, knowing where the products are in the production line, and keeping track of stocks in particular store. RFID can be very, very useful. My kurta has a RFID tag which can actually tell when the purchase was made. When from the time of production till the time of sale, you can actually track by having this RFID tag, which is basically sending out some signals. Receivers are collecting the information about where the product is, right? So is it still in the production state? Is it in transit from production to let's take retail? Is it from the shop? Which part of the shop it is kept, and how long the product. So you can also understand about when the product came into the shop and how long is it taking for it to be actually being sold. That's the radio frequency ID, RFID tags. In this article, however, the fluctuations of public interest, politics, public policy, and at times law are not central. The focus rather is the foundation for policy and law expressed in terms of morale, political and social values. The main crux of what the argument for the article is. Yeah, some of the three principles concerned in limiting surveillance of citizens and use of information about them by agents of government, restricting access to sensitive personal or private information, and curtailing instructions into places deemed private or personal. Okay. So these are the three principles that are concerned with in terms of the principles that the article is talking about. Protecting privacy of individuals against intrusive government agents. First week I briefly mentioned about government having access to information, all that. Constitution and Bill of Rights provide what is probably the most significant source of principles defining limits by which the information about a citizen can be collected, can be used. Examples of the protection that the citizens get is First Amendment, First, Third, Fourth, Fifth, Ninth, and the 14th Amendment, with the examples that is given, which is speech, soldiers, search and seizure, self-incrimination, and personal liberty versus state action amendments. Right, so that's the amendments that are available for protection of privacy for U.S. citizens. Privacy Act of 1974. I think these are so probably later in the course we will talk about just the legal aspects, different laws across different worlds. But for now, Privacy Act of 1974 significant limits of use of which agencies of federal government could put databases of personal information, which is, it gives protection of who can get, it gives protection for how much of information can be collected, who gets access to what information, right? At what level should we be getting, right? Federal agencies mean, does everybody in the federal agency get access to all the information of every citizen in the country, or is there some kind of a grades? Is there some kind of a restriction on the role, which also can be connected to role-based access control of information? Who gets access to what information, depending on the roles that they play. Another line here is, further, although there is nothing inherently unfair in trading some measure of privacy for a benefit, both parties to exchange should participate in setting the terms. So this, again, both parties here talking about the government and the user, or the Amazon and the customer, all of that. One thing to keep in mind is that, and one thing is even hard, is actually how to measure the benefit of information being collected, benefit of using that information, and benefit of what is that as a consumer, I really don't know what benefit that Amazon is getting because of collecting the information about my recommendations. Restricting access to intimate, sensitive, or confidential information. Again, some of these are self-explanatory. This is basically talking about who gets access to what information, but particularly looking at sensitive and confidential information. Curtailing intrusions into spaces or spheres deemed private or personal. Again, this is also self-explanatory. Who should get access to what space? Right. So the arguments that the article is continuing to make is that, look, privacy cannot be defined. The principles that we saw, right, OECD principles, FTC principles, all of that, and generally the definition of privacy itself cannot be universal, has to be kept in particular context. One is that it is posed as an universal account of what does and what does not warrant restrictive privacy motivated measures. That is, as a conceptual framework, it is not conditioned on dimensions of time, location, and so forth. That's the definition of privacy that has been looked at. Another is that it expresses a right to privacy in terms of dichotomies, sensitive and non-sensitive. So if you just look at it, until now also we've been talking about just the definition of privacy just being binary, right? Sensitive or non-sensitive, private or public, government and private, right? So that's probably not the best way of describing what the privacy is. Two norms are proposed in this article, which says norms of appropriateness and norms of flow of distribution. I'll just show you what it means briefly, but these are two expectations of contextual integrity definition. Contextual integrity is maintained when both types of norms are upheld, which is followed, and it is violated when either of the norms is violated. Appropriateness. Norms of appropriateness dictate that information about person is appropriate or fitting to reveal in the particular context. So, appropriate information that is provided in a given context again. As important as what is not appropriate, we are not expected to share our religious affiliations with employers, financial standing with friends and acquaintances, performance at work with physicians, etc. So this is the expectations, appropriateness that is defined here. Generally, you're not expected to share all this information, is what mentioned here. So this next one is, so this is about contextual integrity and justice. This is later part of the article, which is talking about contextual integrity asserts that a privacy violation has occurred when either contextual norms of appropriateness or norms of flow have been breached, right? So we should look at actually the flow part also. Yeah. So the flow part is, here it's mentioned as distribution, movement or transfer of information from one party to other is the flow. So the definition again, it says that appropriateness and flow, if both are maintained, contextual integrity is provided. If any one of them is not upheld or followed, contextual integrity is broken. One point of contrast with other theoretical accounts of privacy rights is that personal information revealed in a particular context is always tagged with that context and never up for grabs. So, which is information that is collected in a particular context stays in that context, right? It cannot be given away. The context cannot be removed, and the information can be used for in other context also, right? A picture being taken in a mall, information that is collected for you for giving you some service in a mall cannot be used for some other context. The conditions has to be maintained in that particular context. Yeah, so that's the article. Again, the article is pretty long, which is of 39 pages. I will let you take a look at it at your leisure. Feel free to actually ask questions if you're reading the article. We can actually go through, I mean, I can discuss it if you have any particular specific questions from the article separately also. But the idea for me to show this is to give you a sense of another definition of what privacy is. This is also a book, Privacy in Context. A link to the book is here. Again, feel free to take a look at it. So until now, we actually saw about, meaning week 1, we saw about definitions of privacy, particularly also looking at Alan Weston's survey, all that, right? This article is based, I will let you go again, take a look at the article, but this article argues that why that measurements are not actually appropriate. Such measurements may not be appropriate because the questions don't have enough context in it. Again, same author for the contextual integrity. So talking about how the measurements done through Alan Weston's and Pew studies, all of that is very restrictive, is the argument this article makes. Quickly, here is the article, but I'll go through it quickly on this again. The main argument about this article is that surveys that have been done by Alan Weston and Pew studies are restrictive, and it is not, the results may not be even useful in many different contexts, is the article's argument. Defining the different context, sensitive information collected. Yeah, so this article also shows that the privacy has been studied, and even others have actually argued that why the context for collecting this information by Alan Weston is actually very important. So this is researchers' work, which is looking at different parts of privacy, how privacy has been studied in different contexts. So here is another one that will come up, which is Children Online Privacy Protection Act, which is called COPA, and another act which this helps actually protects children. This one is about educational records. This protects the family from getting access to, let's take your grades, unless you give consent to your family for them to get access to your grades, in simple terms. Right, so this is also another important one, which is HIPAA Act. HIPAA, Health Insurance and Portability and Accountability Act. Again, later in the semester, we'll look at how details of each one of them, but quickly this act gives protection for the citizens, saying, let's take, if you were to share the information about you to a hospital or a secondary physician, how long will they get access to? Should they get access to? They will get access to it only when you give consent. I mentioned this in the week 1 also in a different context. Right. So I will let you to go take a look at this article, but the argument is that be skeptical when you look at the results from studies like Allen Weston, which is good, right? I think as part of the class, first we saw how these kind of data can be collected and how the policy decisions can be made with these kind of data. And then there's also this thought of be skeptical, be a little bit skeptical and take it with a pinch of salt, that it may not be useful for all context and all situations. Okay. That's the first part of this week, which is to look at right to privacy, what is contextual integrity, and how you want to be a little bit skeptical about survey data.